And welcome everybody to God's Views on Political News. We're back again with you this week. Bill, there's been a lot happening in just a short week.
Yeah, that's an understatement, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah,
a lot
really
going
is.
on. Portents of other things, I'm afraid.
Yeah. And I want to start out by talking about President Trump's speech last night on Afghanistan and what we were going to be doing. Were you surprised at all about what you heard last night, or was it you just suspected that's what it was going to be?
Well, honestly, I didn't know. I just really didn't know. I guess I'm surprised in the sense that, during the campaign, he was all for pulling out and getting out of these different wars and things like that. And I think that's why a lot of people, not all, I think that's why a lot of people, in part anyway, supported him, because they don't think we should be entangled in all these things. And it's, it has been a long time, So, World War I, we fought for 2.5 years, and it was over. It was an armistice. With World War II, we fought for close to 3.5 to 4 years. Enemies were defeated, and it was over. This is another one of those never-ending engagements, and so I think people tire of it. I'm sure the military and their families, in particular, tire of it. And so I was surprised in that respect, because he seemed to be, of a nature to want to get out of there and let's just end this thing. I'll say this, seeing that he's reversed course, some people, many of his critics, not necessarily liberal or Democratic critics, but many of his conservative critics seem to feel that this is a good move. It's a step in the right direction. Even some have interpreted it as being maybe he's actually starting to listen to the counselors around him. I'll just say that if we're going to extend this and we're going to put more troops over there, let's do what needs to be done decisively, get it over with, so that people can go home to their families. That's how I feel about it.
A number of people were saying last night after, he made the comment saying, my first gut instinct was to go ahead and just pull out of Afghanistan and leave. Then he said, like a lot of people have told me that once you take the office as president, things change and you have to look at things differently and you have to listen at people around you. And so I think people were a little surprised by the fact that he didn't follow his instinct, because usually his instincts are correct and they've served him well. And I guess he's admitting, but maybe as a president, I can't always go by my instincts. I have to go by the people who are around me. I think other people who agree with him are glad that he's listening to the generals around him, are glad that he's saying, look, I got these people here. I've surrounded myself with people like Mattis who understand war, who understand what to do, and he's going to guide us into that, and the other people, McMaster, whoever the other generals are. And in some ways, I think that's a good thing, because he's never fought a war. He's not equipped. And obviously the prior administration and the one before, they weren't equipped. I do think what happened, though, in the prior administration, number one, he wasn't listening to his generals. Number two, he was tying their hands over there. Basically, every time they did something, they were brought up for war crimes and things of that nature, or prosecuted in some way by the military. And now we have a president who is saying, we're going to let you go over there and fight the war the way that that it should be fought. We're going to be taking the gloves off of you so that you can handle the military the way it's been handled successfully in the past. And so I think in that regard that it's really good. And Sean Hannity was saying last night that a lot of people that are in the military are applauding President Trump, because they feel now we're going to be given a chance to actually fight this war and do what we should have done all along.
Well, and that's what I meant when I said, if we're going to do this, then let's do what needs to be done and do it decisively. I'm not a soldier, but I understand that war is about defeating the enemy, not making nice with him. You defeat him, and then you can try to make nice. So I'm, in that respect, if he's going to allow the military to do what they do, and let's face it, here's what the military does. This is what an army is designed to do. It's designed to kill the enemy. And, in a lot of folks' mind these days, that's an awful thing, to take someone's life. Well, that's what war is. So if we're going to prosecute a war, then let's do it. Let the military do what they're equipped and trained to do. Change the rules of engagement so that they can actually do their job and hopefully preserve the lives of our, young men and women in uniform. And do it, get it done, and get them home. So I hope that this has come about because he's listening to those who understand military affairs. I'm just hopeful that those people are the Patton types and the blackjack Pershing types that, you know what I'm saying? That say, this is the enemy. This is how we can defeat them. Let's do it. And you give the command and we'll go do it and get it done. If that's what's going on here, wonderful. That being said, we're dealing with an enemy that isn't confined to one nation. It's an ideology that permeates the entire earth to some degree or the other. And this is the challenge in dealing with these Islamic groups, whether it be the Taliban or ISIS or Al-Qaeda or what have you. There's a lot of others that are willing to step up and fill the vacuum once they're gone. So that's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, and I think that was what the prior administration, their mistake. They pulled out. That nothing had been accomplished. It was like, okay, we need to get out of there. Let's go. But it's kind of the ideology was, let's go in and make a regime change. And I think that President Trump is saying, we're not going to be doing that. That's why he didn't go into Syria and get Assad out, because he doesn't want to go in. Sometimes you can make things worse by going in and trying to change the regime. And I think, right. And we've done that. And Afghanistan, I think, is a prime example. And I think that, and that we need to be able to, with Afghanistan, unfortunately, we've been in there, 16 years or whatever. We can't, and we've said to them, we're here for you. We're going to help you. We're going to bring democracy and all that. For us to just leave now is basically going back on our word to them. Although it wasn't President Trump who did that. He's inherited that. And now, the media is quick to say, so now that he's taken this on, it's all on you, President Trump. It's like all the mistakes of the past and everything now are going to be blamed on Trump because now Afghanistan is Trump's war. And I don't agree with that, but that is what's going to happen.
No, I don't agree with that at all. I don't think reasonable people would take that position. Of course, when we talk about the media, we're not talking about reasonable people, are we?
No.
But at the same time, it is kind of, in his hands now. It's like what Harry Truman used to say, the buck stops here. We can pinpoint this one and that one for creating the situation, but it is kind of his responsibility at this point to make some decisions on. So if I'm kind of the mindset, if you start something, be willing to finish it. In this particular case, finishing it means destroying the enemy, destroying their strengths, destroying what, brings them together. It needs to be complete and total war. Get it done. And let's get our people out of harm's way after the victory. So that's how I see it.
And that's a good point. But a lot of people have asked, what does winning that war mean? And I think you've explained the way you feel that it's eliminating the enemy altogether over there in Afghanistan, or at least to a point where they can't do anything. Other people go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to kind of say you got to. It has to be more in this particular situation. It has to be more than just destroying the enemy in the sense of the armies, because it's an ideology, it's a mindset. It's not a political party we're talking about here. In World War II, our grandfathers and our fathers, they fought a political party that had taken over a country and had troops in place. We're talking about a religious ideology that permeates, tens of millions of people who, as long as they think that we're weak and passive, there's always going to be those who will fill the ranks. So that's what I mean. We have to destroy what is rallying them, what's bringing them together. If we're going to go to war with this kind of people, we're going to have to show that we're willing to do whatever we have to do to defeat the enemy. And if you're going to threaten us, this is the end result. And they haven't seen that in a long time. They have seen people who will go so far, play politics, and stop short of a complete victory. If Trump means what he says, then he needs to let the military bring complete victory.
And a lot of people are saying that even if something like that were to happen, like in Syria, when we're getting rid of, killing, eliminating, whatever the word you want to use, ISIS in Syria, that it still doesn't matter because they're over in Barcelona or they're in wherever else, making these attacks, that it's still ISIS doing this and they're still strong. And they have a point there. It isn't any place else, but it is them going in, stabbing people, blowing things up, shooting people, whatever the case may be. But I think if you get rid of the head of the snake, as they say, and really cut them off, then you're going to see all these little terrorist cells around sort of being eliminated just because there's nobody who's leading everything. And eventually they'll just more fade away. Well, that's the theory anyway.
Have you ever been around an animal, maybe a dog, and it was very intimidating, acted like it was going to attack you or bite you, and people said, don't let them know you're afraid, they sense fear? The same thing. That's what we're talking about here. Because these terrorists, they're animals, and they have sensed fear. They have sensed an unwillingness to be decisive. And they exploit that, and that's why you're having all these attacks. And I wouldn't say I would guarantee it, but I would come close to guaranteeing that if the Trump administration and the Defense Department took the attitude, you know what, we're going to declare complete and total war on those who are doing these kinds of things, and we show them that we mean business, and we're not going to pull our punches, and they see that we're strong and we're determined, I guarantee you some of this nonsense will stop.
Yeah, and I do like the way that President Trump said, we're going to have you start paying your way too. We're not going to be doing this all our own. We're not going to be paying all this money. You're going to have to be contributing because we give you a lot of money as it is. So I think it's good. It's like teaching, the person how to be a fisherman rather than feeding them, just giving them fish. And I think that this country has to take up arms, and they have, but they need to continue to do that and more stand up for their country and protect their own country. Because, I wonder, if we keep this attitude with them, we'll be there forever. And I know that's not the intent of this president. And he's not going to come out and say, well, we're going to be there for 2 years, 4 years, whatever. He's not going to give you a plan strategy like Obama does or did.
Right. Well, let me think about it this way. In general, how do we treat our teenagers and 20-somethings in this country? We give them what we want. We're trying to coax them to grow up, but we continue to give them what they want, and they don't know how to do anything for themselves. And I'm speaking in generalization here. I know that there are exceptions to every rule, but just the things that are being going on in our country are evidence of that. They're accustomed to getting what they want. When they don't get what they want, they throw a hissy fit, and then we give them what they want. Well, we kind of treat countries that way too. We don't demand that they grow up, so to speak, in this regard. And I'm hopeful that he means what he says, that we'll start expecting the Afghans and the Iraqis and these other nations to, hey, we kind of give you an opportunity here. You're going to have to seize the opportunity, and you're going to have to kind of take control of this situation, because we're not going to do it forever. I hope that's what he means, and I hope he sticks to it.
Yeah, I do too. And I just want to say hello to everybody in our chat room. I know we haven't done that this morning, and also to let you know, remind you that it's okay to make comments and ask any questions during the broadcast. Perfectly fine. Glad that you're here.
As long as it doesn't involve a lot of heavy math. That's all I ask.
I know. No Common Core either. Okay.
No.
One of the things that the president did say last night too, that I thought was kind of reaching out and talking about, we talked about last week about Charlottesville. That was it just happened, and we spent a whole hour practically talking about Charlottesville. And I know the president spoke out in his speech last night and said, we have to come together. We have to stop the unrest in the United States in order to come together to support those people that are going to Afghanistan to fight for us and to get rid of ISIS. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, he's right. Yeah, I mean, a house divided against itself cannot stand. That's not just a poetic statement. That is a fundamental truth. And so he's right about that. Now, here's the challenge. Some of the people that are causing the unrest in this country are of the same mindset and ideology as the people who were going to be battling in Afghanistan and all these other places. Not necessarily that they are Taliban, but they're Antifa, they're anarchists, they're communists, they're godless, and so they have the same mentality. And by the way, the only thing that's going to get their attention is a show of strength and resolve. It's going to take that kind of strength and resolve domestically to deal with these people who are threatening the overthrow of the government, who are saying all kinds of vulgar things where the Constitution, the Declaration, and freedom of speech, all these different things and liberties that we have taken for granted. Their goal is to destroy those things, to eradicate those things, to start something else. So we've kind of got the same problem going on internally as we do overseas, and until we're determined to declare total war on that kind of thing, there isn't going to be any cessation from the unrest and the upheaval. And so we're going to have to be just as determined in that regard too.
I really feel that way. Jeffrey saying, I pray he does not simply pull out and leave a vacuum in the region like President Obama did with Iraq. Terrorism will grow if we do that in Afghanistan. Also, we can't forget how fully pulling out will impact the humanitarian efforts or functions our presence has had in the region. And I think that's true. We were kind of talking about that,
It is true. I mean, let me bring a biblical concept into it to make the point. In the Gospel of Matthew, the Messiah talks about, he healed a man who had an unclean spirit. And so he talks about how that when an unclean spirit goes out of a man, it goes through dry places, it looks for rest, it can't find any, and finally it returns to that house that it was sent out of, the person. And if he sees the house is swept out clean and everything's in order, which on the surface sounds nice, if he finds it that way, he goes and finds 7 of his friends that are more wicked than him, and they all move in together. The point is, you can't go in and throw one bad guy out and then leave the house empty. It has to be filled with something. And of course, in this case, it's the Holy Spirit he's talking about. In this respect, we can't just go in, throw the one bad guy out, whether it's Saddam Hussein or the Taliban, and then just leave and not expect that it's going to be worse later than when we got there. So I agree with Jeffrey. At the same time, let's don't play patty cake. Let's go ahead and do the job, get it done.
Yeah.
And show them that, and I hope this is the case, that the current administration means business when it says it wants to eradicate radical Islam from the face of the earth. Then if we show that we mean business, they'll respect that.
Yeah, and I agree, and it's the same type of thing that he did before North Korea, and North Korea respected what he said and backed off when people were saying, yeah. "Oh, you're being too mean,"
Yeah, isn't it funny? He got a little crazy there in some people's mind, right. and yet the little Pillsbury Doughboy over there backed off somewhat. So good for Trump in that respect.
Yeah, and I think the North Korean dictator is starting to make some waves again and do some things. I saw some breaking news about him depicting Trump in a cemetery or something like that. So, I think all of that has to do with when you back off, or when you hear again the unrest that we have in America, when you hear the media speaking out against Trump, when he's trying to do what's best for America, and he's always said his number one goal is to protect Americans. And so when you have that sort of being undermined, it's not helping matters at all, So,
no, just like a dog can sense fear, sharks can smell blood.
Exactly.
So when blood's in the water, they come circling, to see if they can find an inroad. So, what a lot of the media is doing, and this is my opinion, I'm not speaking for you necessarily, I think you'll agree with me, but what a lot of the media is doing really is threatening the national security of the country when they push their agenda, when the Antifa is allowed to push their agenda unabated. That really is the threat to national security, not a 3 a.m. tweet from Trump necessarily.
Yeah. No, and I think that's one of the things too, that I think some people are confused as to, what is the whole deal with Antifa? Who are they fighting? Who are they? And again, I wrote an article today at SusanKnowles.com, and really what we're looking at people who are espousing the communist ideology. What we're seeing in America, this unrest, they want us to believe this is about white supremacy, it's about monuments and all that. No, actually it's not. It's about the tactic that they're using to push their agenda. These people, Antifa, they call themselves, and it's a long definition here, but they call themselves the anarcho-communist cause is what they believe in. And the definition, I'll just give you part of the definition of what that means, is it's one who advocates for the abolition of the state, private property, capitalism in favor of common ownership or control of the means of production. It's all about the collective. It's all about, communism. It's all about what we're seeing on the streets with Antifa. If you wanted to get rid of Antifa, you know what the quickest way how to do that, Bill? You just make it illegal for them to wear masks in public. Okay? That will be one of the quickest ways to squash what they're doing, because they hide behind those masks and they bring their bats. I'm not saying that it would stop them 100%, but if you have the ability to go out and arrest someone for wearing a mask in public, and in many states, you can't do that. So why isn't that being done? Why aren't we moving forward more to do that and get rid of this group?
Well, first of all, I find it ironic that they say that they're fighting against fascism and the KKK and, people who hide behind masks, and yet they hide behind masks. Now, I'm not defending the KKK. It's just I find that ironic. But I have another plan how we can help eradicate the Antifa, and that is to make their parents tell them to get out and get a job. That's going to eradicate a lot of it right there. Anyway, I'm saying that tongue in cheek, but
it's true.
But it's true, because anybody who doesn't want to work, it's real easy for them to get involved with a group that says, well, let's just overthrow everybody and take away all their property. We'll have some. It'll be all of ours. All these things that everybody else has worked for, we want to move in now. Well, that's what the mafia does. And by the way, that's what the adversary does. He's from the very beginning, this is what he seduced the woman with. God said, don't eat from this tree. And he's thinking, or he's telling her, God just doesn't want you to have what he's got. You should have what he has. We should all just share this. I mean, that's the concept. And so communism, socialism, all the different isms, their father is the devil, the adversary, Satan, whatever you want to call him. This is where it all comes from. And the Antifa, what really, really bugged me the most about Charlottesville and what's happened since then in Dallas, although the Dallas Police Department seemed to have a handle on things,
They did.
What happened in Boston, to some degree, it seemed the Boston Police Department tried to, prevent things from getting too out of hand, although they were, thoroughly outnumbered and subjected to awful things. Nonetheless, what bothers me the worst about this is because with the aid of the media and many politicians, the Antifa and the anarchists and these communists are getting a free pass because they were fighting the KKK. They were fighting white supremacy. They were fighting, neo-Nazis. Okay? All of which you and I stand against. All right? We're not for those kinds of things. But Confederate memorials and monuments, and now monuments to Christopher Columbus and even Christian symbols, those things are easy targets. They're convenient targets, but that's not what it's about. It's not about toppling monuments. It's about toppling governments. It's about toppling a mindset. I would even say, Susan, it goes beyond toppling the government of the United States, the Constitution, and the Declaration of Independence. It goes into the spiritual realm. It goes into eradicating the things that inspired people like Washington and William Bradford and the framers and the founders of this nation. And that is the Word of God, these principles that are inherent in the Word of God, because they're going to come against that. That's really what it's all about. All this other stuff, it's, like I said, easy targets, convenient targets, but they're really after something a lot bigger than that.
Yeah, and one of the things when I was doing some research before I wrote my article, I looked up there's actually 45 goals for communism. And part of those goals, I think some of the most important is to go after the young people. When you were talking about these people should get a job, they are targeting the millennials. They're targeting their schools. They're targeting their newspapers. They're targeting anything they could get to get in the minds of the children, and in the spiritual minds and the hearts of the kids as well. And they're also using the media. And we're seeing that because most, if not all, of those people out there, Antifa, the people who are supposedly KKK, Black Lives Matter, you name it, they're young people. Now, one of the things, too, that I wanted to say, since we talked about Charlottesville last week, there have been a lot of new developments, a lot of things that I've seen, some things I can confirm and some things that I can't. But I find them to be very interesting. For example, this is an allegation by a police officer that came forward and saying that they were told by the mayor of Charlottesville to stand down, and that's why the police didn't do anything. A news reporter from Fox News who was there on the scene was basically reporting at the time that the police weren't doing anything, that people were coming out bloodied, that the tear gas was going everywhere, and yet the police were doing nothing. And he asked a police officer, allegedly this is what he said, why aren't you doing anything? And they're like, well, we're leaving. It's too dangerous here. So, there was the Governor McAuliffe made a report, and this is what I saw. I don't know this, can't confirm this one, that he said that there was a cache of weapons that was found at the site. And the police said that's absolutely not true. I did see a slow motion video that kind of surprised me. This is why we were talking last week about the car crash that killed that young woman. People were saying something's not right about this. As I mentioned last week, there was an African-American man in his 40s who was there at the time. And he said, I think this wasn't intentional. I think this was a car crash. And he got scared and he sped away. And when I saw this slow motion video of the car crashing into this woman, at the time it shows, at least what I saw, I don't know if it was doctored. It didn't appear to be, but I don't know. I'm not an expert in that. It appeared to be that when he crashed into the cars, somebody was behind the car. If you're looking at it, it would be on the left-hand side, reaching out like with a baseball bat and hitting the backup lights of the car. And right after that happened, the guy sped away. That could have been something that scared him. I don't know. My point is there's a lot of stuff going on in Charlottesville that doesn't seem right. another young man who reported, and he talked about a friend who was there. Now, this I absolutely can't confirm, but he was saying, according to her, these buses all lined up to bring people to this rally, and that getting off of these buses that parked together, KKK and Black Lives Matter, both on these buses, and people wearing KKK t-shirts. Now, I don't know about you, Bill, but I've never seen a KKK t-shirt in my life. I've never seen anybody even almost wear something like that. And yet there were so many people who just happened to have these KKK rally t-shirts getting off buses next to the BLM. Something is going on. And I think that something is that we, meaning those people out there who are communists, Antifa, all that, need an agenda and need that agenda to work. And this is what they have, put together, seemingly, allegedly, with Charlottesville.
Well, I heard all of those things myself, read about some of these different reports that are surfacing. Like you, I'm not going to say anything dogmatically because I don't know.
Right.
But we do know this. Louis Gohmert of Texas has appealed to the Justice Department to open up an investigation as to whether or not the mayor of Charlottesville and the governor of Virginia, both closely aligned Clintonites, if they actually established or orchestrated a situation whereby they were trying to inspire a clash of something, or something to happen, or they would know that something would happen, and that's why the orders were given to stand down. So that's not just, an obscure little report. That's a member of Congress saying we need to open up an investigation and check into this and see if there's any validity to it. So obviously there's enough there that Louis Gohmert thinks we should at least ask some questions. That being said, I am convinced at this point that what we're seeing, or what we saw in Charlottesville, what we're seeing since then, is an effort on the part of those who are blatantly trying to overthrow the government, trying to bring chaos to the nation, and those who are behind the scenes, who are acting in an overt way to try to bring about their ideals. I don't even think it's about Trump anymore. I don't think it's so much about them despising President Trump anymore as much as it is that they despise what America's supposed to be. And they have another agenda. And I think that's what this is really all about. And I want to go back to something you said earlier as it relates to all these young people being indoctrinated. This is not an effort to put in a little shameless plug here, but, last year we come out with this book, Esau Rising, and it talks about the spirit of Esau and what that represents. And I just wanted to read something that I wrote in the book, and it has to do with the story of Esau and Jacob, and how that Jacob cooks a meal. Esau comes in really hungry. Jacob says, well, sell me your birthright and I'll give you something to eat. And he says, well, what good is this birthright to me anyway? I feel like I'm about to die. And so he sells his birthright, which is considered sacred and holy, for something that was very common, a bowl of soup. All right. So here is what I wanted to read to you. And so how did Esau view the heritage that had been handed down to him? That was represented by the birthright. How did he view the heritage that had been handed down to him from his forebears? His reply says it all. It meant nothing to him. In other words, what were the things that were important to his father didn't mean anything to him. That which was holy and sacred was easily discarded to attain short-lived pleasure. That which his father had revered and struggled to preserve, Esau hated. And this shameful attitude toward God defines Esau. So I contend that today, any person, nation, or society that vilifies what is sacred to God embraces the spirit of Esau, the one that God said he hated. And those who despise their God-given heritage, and they loathe what their fathers fought to preserve, exhibit the same deplorable traits that he did. Those who follow in his footsteps are more than willing to trade their sacred birthright for a mess of pottage. In other words, I hate what this country stands for. I hate what the fathers of this country thought to bring into being. I want what I want, and I'm willing to destroy everything in order to get it. They would give away whatever is asked of them, no matter how precious or valuable, to simply be given what their carnal nature desires. They are concerned only for the immediate gratification of their appetite and care nothing for those things that require them to be responsible to a higher calling. As with Esau, these people should also be considered corrupt, profane, and of a reprobate mind. That is what we're dealing with here. And I just wanted to read one other thing. And this comes off of William Bradford's tombstone. For those who may not remember who William Bradford is, he was on the Mayflower. He was served as one of the governors of the Plymouth Plantation, the Pilgrims. Here's what's on his tombstone. Written in Latin, what our fathers with so much difficulty attained, do not basely relinquish. In other words, we fought hard to establish a nation. People made sacrifices. Generations have made sacrifices. And so what's coming up among this younger generation, what's being fed to them by others older than them, is everything that our forefathers represent, we should hate, we should stand against, we should try to bring it down. That's Esau. That's this spirit. You want to call it communism? It's communism. It's socialism. It's anarchy. It's all of these. It's Antifa. But it's base. It's godless. And anything to do with God, it wants to destroy. And among the nations today, Susan, what one nation does more to promote liberty? Yes. To promote freedom of speech and all these other things that we enjoy. But what's at the heart of all those things? Where do those liberties really come from? They're not given to us by government. They're given to us by God. So that's the real enemy that these people have, and that's what they're aiming to destroy.
And I think you answered the question of somebody saying, when and where does all this insanity end? I've heard about, Nancy Pelosi wanting to remove all the statutes and other people, statutes of even Columbus and, this is going to erase history. That's the point. They want history erased. They want the America, the way you knew it, the way I know it, everybody knows it. They want that gone. It goes so far as to, destroying the family, destroying religion, destroying anything and everything that Americans have always held dear. It's the goal to get rid of that. And again, it has nothing to do really with the statutes. It's not about suddenly one day somebody just woke up and said, those are offensive to me. It's just that the powers that be, the dark side, the Antifa and the other groups like that got together and said, okay, what can we use now? Oh, I know racism always works. Let's go back to what's tried and true. We'll do that. And this is just one more thing. And you talk about it, this being also, it is a spiritual battle. It always has been, always will be. Excuse me. One thing I find interesting is that now, we've talked about before how President Trump is surrounded by these evangelicals and pastors that come and help him and help guide him spiritually. We've had recently one of them who was on that advisory type council has stepped down. We've had other people. Pastor Mark Burns is, I believe, African American, and people are going after him saying, you need to get off that council. You have somebody here that is a racist and you need to get off the council. And thank God we have in what Pastor Burns seems to be a godly man who says, are you kidding me? You don't just step down because you feel like it when God has called you to do something.
That's right.
So at least cooler heads have prevailed there.
Well, and I commend him. I read that, what his response was. And it was, if God has called me to do this, then I'm not stepping down until God calls me to do it. So obviously there were people on there for political reasons. and apparently this man feels it goes beyond that. But let's look at something else here too. Let's say that Trump was a racist. I don't believe he is. Okay. I don't believe he is. I mean, you're not going to convince me, knowing what I know about neo-Nazis and the Klan, you're not going to convince me that he is a sympathizer with those groups when his son-in-law is an Orthodox Jew and his daughter converted to Judaism. I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. All right,
yeah.
But all right, for the sake of the argument, let's say that he was a racist. Jesus hung out with sinners. Jesus went into places where women of ill repute would show up and who in tears, wash his feet and dry them with their hair because they had been forgiven. He went into the house of tax collectors and had conversations. And when he was being pressured to break company with these people, don't be around them, doesn't he know who he's hanging out with here? His response was, look, the physician doesn't go to the people who are well. The physician goes to the people who are sick. That's just the way it's supposed to work. So again, I don't believe Trump is a racist. I don't believe that. But if he were, okay, this pastor should be right there speaking into his ear. This is what Bible says. This is what God says. This is what the Messiah says. And you need to make decisions based on what God says, not what this one or that one says. So I commend a man that would stand up and resist the political nature of this and try to be true to what God has called him to do. So, people like that need to be applauded. They need to be encouraged. And we need to pray that there would be more people like him that will surround the president, that surround people in his administration. And we need to continue to pray for those people who are this support group. They have a tough job right now.
They're under attack, and the thing of it is with President Trump, he has come out before, even during the campaign, he denounced David Duke. He's continued to denounce David Duke. He does things that nobody likes to talk about. For example, there was a homeless African-American woman in New York, and he took her, and as far as I know, she's still living in Trump Tower free. That's a pretty good step up. You're not living in a hovel, and he's done that. And then when Caitlyn Jenner came to Trump Tower and wanted to use the women's restroom, he didn't say, no, you can't go in there and you can't do that. So all these things, my point is that all these things that these people are saying have no basis in reality, but it doesn't matter to them. Because if they say it long enough, it's Saul Alinsky's rule book. Say it long enough, often enough, and people will start to believe it. And that's what they hope to do by just repeating over and over, oh, you need to do this, and you need to denounce the KKK, you need to denounce white supremacy, whatever the case may be. As we've said before, it will never be good enough because that doesn't fit the agenda. They just keep going with it.
Well, I agree with that. They're never, they're not going to be satisfied. Nothing he can do or say or doesn't do is going to appease them because they have a different agenda. That being said, if the president were listening to us talk right now, I would say, Mr. President, you're going to have to be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove as you maneuver through these things. I don't believe the man's a racist. I don't, because again, he's got a son-in-law who's an Orthodox Jew. He seems to be very pro-Israel, and last I heard there were a lot of Jews living there.
Just a couple.
By the way, and by the way, there's a lot of Ethiopian Jews there too. They're dark-skinned Jews. I don't believe that he's a racist. I mean, if his attitude toward Jews and blacks, for that matter, if his support of Israel and other things that he does says the opposite of that. On the other hand, Obama was obviously very anti-Israel, and they're full of Jews. As far as I can tell, Obama didn't go to great lengths to help the black community. So, seems to me, if you wanted to scream someone's a racist, based on that, It might be that Obama fits the bill a lot better than Donald Trump does. Yet, I still believe, to be fair, to be balanced here, that oh, did I just say that? I'm sorry, I stole that from someone else. Not
Fox
on
News fair balance, and not anymore. Anyway.
Yeah, not anymore. Anyway, I do believe that he needs to be understanding where we're at. He does need to be a bit more careful to not step into people's traps that they're laying for. That's the only thing I would say there, because he knows they're out there. I know that there's nothing he can do or say that's going to please them. That's a given, but at the same time, do everything you can not to give them more ammunition. I would just say that.
Yeah, it's true. But in the speech that he gave following Charlottesville, when he blamed all people, all wrongdoers, used to be when we had common sense, when that prevailed, that was a reasonable thing to say. Yeah. You don't just look at one group and say they did wrong when you got three others standing over here doing the same thing. So in that regard, that wasn't a tweet that he said something and made people upset. That was just him actually being truthful, and people didn't like it.
Well, I mean, what he said, I thought it was appropriate.
Yeah, it's accurate.
There's bad people on both sides, and that's true. As I think any reasonable person can see this and come away with that conclusion. But politics gets involved, and sensitivities get involved. Knowing there's going to be a snare for him, I'm going to hope and pray that he'll be a little bit more careful not to step into somebody's trap. At the same time, if he's surrounded by people who are giving him godly advice, and I hope there are, if there's, others like this pastor that you mentioned that are an advisory council, I hope that they will give him good, wise, godly counsel, because we are admonished to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves, even as we are following God's leading. The man's got a lot on his plate, and he's got a lot of, he is having to deal with people who've, kept up with us know, I did come out for Trump. I'm not a big Trump fan in that regard. But at the same time, he is the president. He is the one, obviously, that God has chosen for this time, for whatever reason. And for no other reason, we need to pray for him. But I tell you what, in my lifetime anyway, I don't see anyone that's had to deal with just this all-out assault. He's had to deal with a lot of stuff. Some of it, self-inflicted. But nonetheless, he's had to deal with a lot of stuff. So for the sake of the country, we need to pray for this man and for those that surround him.
Well, and it's an everyday assault. It's not like, and I don't know any other president who has been this much under attack, ever.
Not in our lifetime, anyway.
Not in our lifetime, no. And too, I wanted to say, speaking of Jared Kushner, I don't know if you know this or not, because mainstream media just didn't bother to cover it because there were other more important things for them to cover. But Jared Kushner and Dina Powell and Jason, I can't remember the guy's last name, somebody else in part of the council, they're over in the Middle East right now. They went back to talk to the leaders of the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, other countries, and they're going to be on Wednesday meeting in Israel. So we're back again to trying to bring about a peace agreement. It seems, I don't know the timing. I don't know why now. what are your thoughts on some of that?
As far as the whole in general having a peace agreement, or just why now?
Well, no. I know about the peace agreement, and how you feel about that, but why now? Why are we going back now, trying again? And we've done this is the second time now that Jared Kushner, I think, has been sent back to try to bring about a peace agreement. Is there any particular issue with timing that you can think of?
Off the top of my head, I can't, politically, I can't think of any reason. But we have just entered into a very unique time on the Hebrew calendar, which begins a time or a season of what's called Teshuvah, or repentance. Tonight at dusk begins the month of called Elul, and the month of Elul will lead us up to the High Holy Days, beginning with the Feast of Trumpets, Yom Teruah. Some people call it Rosh Hashanah. The Day of Atonement, which will conclude the season of repentance. And so each time this year, I'm always fascinated at what is happening about that time. And so I don't know that this has anything to do with Jared Kushner going back to Israel, pursuing a peace agreement. But as far as the timing of it, that's the first thing that comes to my mind. And I would add to that, as you know, yesterday we had the great American eclipse.
Right. And
my family and I, where we live, actually was in the very heart of, or the very center of the path, the shadow that the moon was going to cast as it moved its way across the United States. On one hand, it was very exciting. It was an awesome sight. I'd never seen anything like it. Pictures do not do it justice. And at the same time, I'm thinking, okay, God, what are you saying here? The sun is being blotted out. Darkness is coming upon the land. And with all the things that have been going on in Charlottesville and the things that are going on in Boston and the Antifa and all these things, our nation is in a very precarious situation. And the nation was divided in two by this shadow. Is it to say the nation is being divided, and it's a portent of things to come? So then you throw into that the fact that the Trump administration, through his son-in-law, is going to Israel to reignite these discussions about Israeli-Palestinian peace. I don't know what to conclude about it, but it just seems it's a very interesting development. We'll just have to wait and see, because you and I talked once before the first time he went, people were saying that he was the Antichrist. That is right. that is the son-in-law. I don't believe he is, but it's just we're living in very interesting times, and so we need to look beyond the Confederate memorials and even beyond the Antifa and all these things, and let's decipher what's really going on spiritually speaking. There's a war going on spiritually. And as God's people, we need to really be in tune with what God is saying at this particular time. Pay attention to what he's saying. And I think the first word that he would speak to all of us as his people is that we need to repent. We need to turn from our own wicked ways, get the beam out of our eye first so that we can help get the speck out of the other guy's eye. And a lot of times God uses thorns and thistles. He puts thorns at our side. Why? Not to hurt us, but to provoke us. To provoke us to turn back to him, to turn back to what's right, to get our attention. Charlottesville got our attention. Now, people are making different conclusions about it, but it has our attention. We're talking about it. You and I got to see beyond the external and the temporal things and see what's going on spiritually. Reigniting the Mideast peace process. We know that one day someone's going to succeed at this. Who knows? Who knows what's going to happen here?
Yeah, and I think one of those things too about repentance, it's so good to know that, we do need to turn back to God. And I think also, and one of the things that has struck me, and it was so important to me to get the word out about Antifa and about the agenda being communism, because, communism in and of itself is anti-God.
It's godless.
It's godless. And I think people need to see what God is trying to wake us up to see. But because if you think it's about monuments, then you're not going to see what God is calling you to do. And God is calling many of us, if not all of us, to fight against this. And I don't mean take up arms in the street. I mean spiritually to fight this battle. to pray harder, to pray for people that are in danger, like possibly the president and other people and our own selves and each other. Because, we are going to be impacted by what these people do, depending on how far it spreads before lawfulness is maintained, and gotten back to a lawful nation, because we've been away from it for quite a while, during the last, and also I think it is, God has said that he's going to give us signs about the end times and his return. I know right now that I've heard that in Syria, it's been reported that Israel believes that Iran is making missile plants over there in Syria. And they're also afraid that Iran is coming in and getting a stronghold. And Israel has said, we are not going to allow that to happen. They're not going to do sanctions and say, will you please do this, pretty please. They're going to go, and if they feel it necessary to protect Israel, they're going to attack. Some people may believe this may be Isaiah 17 and the destruction of Damascus, if this would occur. That it may be Israel, in fact, who destroys Damascus and not who we thought it might be. So there's a lot of things happening. Some people getting attacked in Syria, by different factions there. So that the Middle East heats up. Seems like we don't talk about it in the news. We're so busy focused on what they want us to focus on, again, which is not really what's happening, and that's taking down of monuments and racism.
Well, I have said it for a long time that the adversary is the master illusionist. And an illusionist wants you looking here at this hand, what he's doing here, Confederate memorials and Trump and this and that, because he doesn't want you looking at the other hand, because that's what he's really up to. So we need to keep that in mind. As it relates to God, speaking to us through signs, one of the things that we're told in the book of Genesis, that the sun, moon, and stars are there as signs. Actually, that word can be translated as omens. And in Judaism, a solar eclipse is not a sign to Israel. It's to be considered a sign to the nations, like ours. And the message is to those nations, unless you get your act together, there's some bad stuff getting ready to happen. I know some people will just, pshaw that, but I take it seriously. And so, there's a lot of things going on in the world, and we're focused on Confederate memorials. If anything needs to be toppled, it needs to be our pride, so that we'll humble ourselves before God. Because unless there's a spiritual renewal in this land among God's people, there's no way that you're going to overcome Antifa and the anarchists and the communists. There's no way, because I believe that those kinds of situations, that's the thorn in our flesh that God allows to prick us in an effort to turn us back to him. And if we don't take this seriously in that sense, all these other political responses are not going to do any good.
And the good news, though, out of all this, Bill, is that the darkness came over where you live, and where I live in California, it was bright and sunny. So I'm going to take that as a really good sign that everything in California.
That everything's going to be okay in California?
Yeah, there's going to be no more craziness in California.
Okay, you go with that. Let's see how that works.
That's all I have. That's all I've got clinging to. Please let that be said.
Well, the one thing I did notice during the eclipse, and it was an absolutely astounding sight. I mean, it was, you can hear people talk about it, but it really was what people say. It was very exciting. But what I did also notice is that even though the sun was blotted out, it was amazing that just the least little sliver of sunlight, what kind of light it actually produced.
Yeah.
I mean, it was almost covered, but just one little snippet of sunlight. When it broke through, the darkness was dispelled. And so here's where I'm going with that. You and I are called to be the light in the midst of the darkness. And we look at ourselves and we don't see that maybe I can't really make that much difference. But it's amazing what one little sliver of light can do in the midst of the darkness. And that's what God's people need to be about these days.
Absolutely. And we wanted just to say, thank you again, everybody, for being here today. It was a pleasure for you to allow us to be here and talk to you. And please share this with everybody that you can, and come back again next week. We'll have another great show. Until then, God bless you. Stay safe. Bill, any final words?
No, yeah, actually I do. Something else that happened this week is Jerry Lewis passed away. And Jerry Lewis growing up was one of my favorite people. And so in honor of Jerry Lewis,
hot lady, oh lady.
Oh no, he had to go there. All right. Thanks, guys. See you next week. Oh my God.